Whatever, if I hit my head skydiving with or without drugs, I'm going to die. I have to live now, not in the future when you tell me to, Dr. Nobody.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The show is about to begin.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. This is the Hey Ed YouTube channel, and I am your host, moderator, and all-around nice guy, Edward Anderson. And I've got a real fun one for you today. We have one of our favorite guests here on the Hey Ed YouTube channel, Rob Bruss, joining us again from Australia. Hey, Rob, how you doing, buddy?
G'day, Ed. Great to see you, mate, and good to be doing another one of these shows with you, man. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I mean, you and I talk a lot, off screen, but of course, but you haven't been on my channel for a while, and I thought, it's time to class up the joint. So let's get Rob back on for a quick video. There's so much stuff going on, but I could talk to you all day about a lot of the subjects that I want to touch on. But what's near and dear to my heart right now in terms of themes is what's going on in the economy, particularly the US dollar and the currency wars going on around the world, and the fact that our personal freedoms are very slowly but steadily being taken away from us every day by not just the American government, but governments around the world. And so I want to start off talking about how the US dollar is being destroyed. Our inflation rate right now, the official rate, is running at 7.9%. Now, we all know that's bogus, that you probably double that and still not be close to the actual inflation rate. But let's go ahead and use their number. Well, most banks right now are paying, if you're lucky, you're getting 1% of the money sitting in your bank. So any dollar you have sitting in your bank or in your wallet is a guaranteed loss. You're losing buying power on that dollar. Now, since 1971, when we went off the gold standard, the buying power of the US dollar has been diminished by 98%. 98%, because as soon as they took the dollars off the gold standard, it was party time. They've been printing those babies like there's no tomorrow. And 40% of all US dollars in existence were created in just the past 2 years. And inflation is blowing up, and I think it's going to get much, much worse. It's going to create an awful lot of problems. Personally, I think that by the end of the summer, we're going to see a lot of wheels coming off of a lot of carts. How does it feel down there in Australia?
Yeah, man, I think I have to agree with you wholeheartedly there with the inflation conversation. It is really, really scary stuff. And I'd encourage people to go ahead and Google this book title. It's called When Money Dies, and it's written by a fellow named Adam Ferguson. And I'll dig out the link, and Ed can put the link down below in the video there for you. And what it is the story of what happened in Germany after World War I, when they had to pay all the war reparations back to Belgium and to France, and what actually happened to their dollar and how it all came undone. If you fast forward here to today and what's happening here in Australia, we have the single most incompetent treasurer in the history of Australian politics in charge of this country. I don't know if the guy knows his ass from his elbow. I really don't know what's going on. He seems like a really nice guy in real life. He's a pretty charismatic character, and he can talk the talk and speak the speak. But the sheer levels of incompetence are just astounding and gobsmacking. And for the average person not really knowing what's going on, the people that are in charge speak this political and corporate doublespeak that uses language that normal people don't understand. But let me put it in a language that everyone will understand. The causes of inflation are directly related to government incompetence and spending, because the only way that government can seem to pay for what it is that they want and they need, and they claim their constituents need, is by creating bonds that the Federal Reserves buy off them. So that's how they print the money to actually make that happen. And it's the most unfair tax of all. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about and you're not sure what that actually means, I encourage you to check out that book to see the people that actually lived through that back in the day. It is scary, scary stuff. And maybe to give it some context, in the next 12 to 18 months, the average wage earner will have $5,000 to $20,000 less per annum. You'll have the same amount of money in your pocket, but because everything will cost more money, the amount that you will have will be considerably less than what it's actually valued at now. And it's a bit of a tricky thing to understand, but I'm sure you've felt that at the petrol pump right now when you guys in the States go to fill up with some gas. They're the highest petrol prices that it's ever been. Here in Australia, the prices were nudging $2.80 per litre. I think it was. That was the highest I paid for it. I only filled up once or twice during these crazy price hikes that have happened recently. But it has been a nasty expense that's overlaid. So petrol essentially is costing 2.5 times as much as what it would ordinarily cost. And if you've got a family with 2 cars and you're driving and you're filling up 1.5 times per week, that means you're essentially filling up 3 times per week. So pretty soon that cost is going to be passed on to you via higher prices for food, via higher prices for everything, because every single thing that you touch, every single thing that exists in your hands, in your home, in your view, in your office, has arrived to you on the back of a truck. And trucks need fuel, and companies have to pay for petrol, and the cost of transport is going to become more because the cost of fuel prices is so much more. I saw some reports earlier today that President Biden has authorized the release of a huge amount of oil reserves that you guys have there in the States. We don't really have that here in Australia. I remember just not too far back in the calendar, just rewind the clock a little bit, oil prices were like below zero. Remember that? Yep. And that's because the energy independence that the United States had forced the prices all the way down. Now we've got a war in Europe, which forces the prices all the way up because these countries are dependent on Russia for all of that. And it's only going to get worse. Just yesterday, that crazy person Putin came out and said, well, if you want to buy gas and you want to buy oil, it's going to be in rubles because you're not allowed to trade in rubles anymore, of course. And Germany has come out and said, no, we're not going to do that. You're not going to blackmail us like that. And it's no surprise, really, that the Russians have come out and said that. And if you look at the ruble, the price of that has rallied pretty considerably. It's almost back to where it was before all of this has happened. But if the Germans turn that off and that goes away, then the price of gas is going to rally as well. And I've seen the folks in Qatar, because they're the biggest producers of gas in the world, have kind of agreed in principle that they're going to actually produce a little bit more and ramp it up and make it all happen. But there's almost no incentive for those countries to actually do it, right? Because the prices are so high and they can just hold everybody to ransom as a result of it. So the problem is that the people that benefit the most out of all of this are the ones that are going to cause the most pain to just average people like you and me and the people that are watching this, because we're the ones that are not the billionaires and the multimillionaires that we have to pay 3 times as much at the petrol pump for our petrol for our families. We're going to have to pay more money for the food that we eat and the things that we buy and that we need, because these people that are running this rock show are so greedy. And it's an awful circumstance to be in. I think you guys in the States there are on the receiving end of it a little bit more than we are here in Australia. The sheer incompetence that I see on a daily basis here in Australia is just gobsmacking. And I physically cannot watch it anymore because I'm just so disgusted by the way that this place is being run, and these people are the so-called leaders. Every time I see it on my YouTube or I see it somewhere, I actually look away from it and I move away from it. And you know, that's a pretty big thing for me to do, because my entire life I've been interested in these things and followed politics and followed all of this stuff, but not anymore. Not doing that anymore. Not with this incompetence. But there's an election just around the corner, so maybe there's a little bit of hope for us in the next couple of months that will change. But I don't think so, because the Australian government and Scott Morrison, who are in charge here, have just in the last couple of days given most Australians about $1,000 boost into their bank account. And I'll tell you what, they could put $10 million in my bank account and I still wouldn't vote for them. They're just a bunch of, they're not crooks. I don't think they're corrupt. They're just unbelievably stupid and incompetent. And that the stupidity and the incompetence there, I think I think I'd rather have them be corrupt and be on the take and run a corrupt South American country than be incompetent, because the incompetence and the pretending of the show of what this actually is worse than the corruption. And another way to describe it is they would be considered political idiots, and political idiots are implanted to create discourse in a country and to create division in a country. And the political idiots that run this rock show are like nothing I've ever seen in the history of Australia.
Well, I go back and forth on whether the powers to be are idiots, or whether they're just incompetent, or whether they are corrupt. And frankly, I'm on the other side of the coin. I would rather have them be stupid, because there's always the chance that they'll learn something along the way. But if they're corrupt,
there's a chance, but unlikely.
But if they're corrupt, that means they've got an agenda. And this is all part of a game plan. And the Federal Reserve, they've been destroying our dollar now for a long time. And I'm starting to think that this is largely by design, because come on, are you really that stupid? The average person knows what happens. Listen, the Federal Reserve's mandate is supposed to be to fight inflation, and their target is supposed to be 2% or less. Okay. And if inflation is running at 8%, and all of a sudden they're surprised after printing 40% of all US currencies in existence over the past 2 years, they're surprised that there's inflation. Okay, come on. And, so I think there might be a little bit of designing going on here. Right now, as we record this, there is a summit going on in Dubai called the World Government Forum. And they're talking about the New World Order. Now, this is scary stuff. And of course, the central theme of that is the whole idea of a brand new financial system. It'll be a global financial system. And of course, it'll be so much better because we're all going to have the same currency, and it's all going to be digital. And you're not going to have those filthy fiat currencies in your wallets anymore. You'll have a nice, clean little card you can use to buy everything. And of course, now we can track every little transaction you do. Okay. And of course, a lot of people will say, "Oh, what's the big deal? It's blockchain. It's just like Bitcoin." Well, no, it's not just like Bitcoin. There are two big differences. Bitcoin is decentralized, whereas their CBDC coin or any of their government digital coins are going to be centralized. And also, the CBDCs are going to be programmable, which means they can determine what you will be allowed to spend your money on. If they know your medical history, and with AI technology now, they're going to, oh, that guy's overweight. We don't think he should be buying that stuff at McDonald's anymore. So cut off his burger purchases, things like that. That guy wants to buy a car that burns gasoline. We don't think that's a good idea. So all jokes aside there, I just want to interject there quickly. MasterCard came out earlier in the week, and they were saying that they were going to do that. They were going to say that the transactions that you have on your MasterCard, whether it's actually a credit card or your MasterCard debit card tied to your bank account, will be tied to the FPOS machine, and they'll be able to track what it is that why are you eating a burger again? I told you that you're only allowed to eat a cricket burger or a lentil burger, or you're only allowed to do all of these things. And if you think that what Ed is talking about is some crazy pie in the sky thing, dear listener, it's not. Here in Australia, just in the last couple of weeks, one of the biggest banks here is called ANZ. The ANZ Bank released its own version of a stable coin. So we have Tether, we have USDC, we have DAI, we've had a bunch of different things that are out there. Now we've got the ANZ coin, which is going to be tied to the Aussie dollar. And in some ways, when you look at that, that's actually not necessarily a bad idea. Because if I could swap that ANZ coin for some Bitcoin or for some Tether, or I can use that to get into some other deal, well, that's the bank's way of creating credit. But if the coins are backed by my bank account, and I've pulled the money out of my bank account to buy the ANZ token to swap it for Bitcoin or for Ethereum or whatever, aren't they just moving from the fiat system to the blockchain? It's really no different.
Now you've got a programmable way to track people and to see their transactions and to do all of those things. Just put that aside for 1 minute and all the evil, nefarious things that has. When you look at a digital currency, whether that comes from a bank or from a government or from a company that's created that particular thing, you're creating credit. And you're creating credit out of thin air, and it's backed by nothing. So it's no different to the Reserve Bank in New York or the Reserve Bank of Australia buying bonds and printing money to buy the bonds to actually get it done. All you're doing is moving the fiat system away from physical cash into digital currency. And I think I mentioned to you recently, I was in the shops, just in a local shopping center recently, and my daughter said to me, "Dad, I need some cash," because she wanted to go out for dinner. She doesn't have a card or a bank account or anything like that just yet. She's kind of too young for that. She doesn't really need it, right? So you need some money, just ask me and I'll get it for you. And we were early. We're going to a movie, and I said, we'll get the cash when we go down to the movie. And I forgot my wallet. I only had my phone. So I could do a cardless withdrawal through the app on my phone, but I needed to get to an ATM. I was like, well, where are all the ATMs? And literally all of the ATMs in the shopping center were gone. All gone. Every single ATM was gone. The only place you could go to an ATM was at the physical bank, where you kind of go in the security door, and then there's the actual ATM itself like that. So it's interesting because the banks are now recognizing that people are just not using cash. So we're not going to pay the rent to have the ATM sitting in a shopping center where it doesn't really make that much money. So let's just get rid of the bloody thing. And people want to get cash out, and they can come all the way down here to get it. Otherwise, they can just tap their card like everybody else. So if you think that this is not happening, and if you think that the World Global Summit is not using these things, it is absolutely doing these things. And the craziness of it is just, it's astonishing. So I don't know. What do you do about it though, Ed? You know, all these conversations are good and everything, but what can we do about it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's get to that in 1 second. I want to make a quick point. Another thing, for those of you who think, well, the government would never do that. Hey, do you have any idea what's going on in Canada these days? There are people who made a $20 contribution to a cause that they liked, a peaceful cause, and they're shut out of their bank accounts. They still to this day, their accounts are frozen. They can't. And if you're a trucker and you participated in any of those rallies, you can't get insurance. They're putting these people out of business. Now, Canadians have this reputation of being the nicest people on earth, right? They're always really nice people. I got to tell you, I'm starting to think they're not that nice anymore. Listen, these Canadians, they elected these people. The Canadian government is ultra liberal these days. The liberals are really, and people of that ilk, they're in power. And even if they're not elected politicians, the bureaucracy is infested with people of that ilk. So this is going to be a much bigger problem to solve than just electing, people of a different stripe.
Here's the flip side of that digital coin, if you like, is one of my mates, a Canadian fellow, sent me a message, and he said, "Hey, great article in the Crypto Cartel," and the headline is "Prime Minister Candidate of Canada promises a blockchain economy." And he says, in light of the global proliferation of the use of Bitcoin and blockchain economy, a Canadian Prime Minister candidate, Pierre Poilievre, has promised that the government he'll be leading will be focusing on creating a decentralized economy. So if you're worried about the Great Reset, you're worried about all of these things, people like this are going to come along, and you've got to be careful, because they don't want to be, you don't want to see them as a prophet, because often they're false prophets. And the alternative government and the alternative people that we have here in Australia are false prophets. Because if you look really closely at their credentials, if you look really closely at their background, they're just as bad as everybody else that's already there, and they're only in it for themselves. They're only in it they give you the appearance that they're going to try and save the world and change everything and bring us into a digital decentralized economy. But the reality is they're not going to do it. And they're just one person who has to try and change the entire status quo, and it just won't happen. What about the mayor of New York that came along and said that, hey, this is going to be a digital economy, and we're going to have Bitcoin, and we're going to create the New York currency, and the people in Florida said the same thing. None of that has happened. They're just all false prophets. So you need to be really careful of that as well.
Well, okay. So what do we do about this? Okay, listen, I do think that, no, I'm sure every generation says this, but I really do think it's true that we are in a moment in time here. We are in a very dangerous, potentially transitional period where the dollar is actively being destroyed. All fiat currencies around the world, their buying powers are going down, and that gives people like the Fed, people with an agenda, to look like saviors to the rescue. We've got something that's going to fix everything, and then they're going to introduce their wonderful new Fed coin that's going to track everything that you do, and it's going to change your life. And this has been going on. This has been in the work now for many years. So it's like the proverbial, slow boiling of the frog, right? We're slowly giving away a little bit of rights here, a little bit of, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, America was listed as the freest country in the world. Now it's listed in terms of how free the country is. Now we are way down the list. We are now below North Macedonia in terms of being a free country. So we've given away a lot of rights. So okay. So what do we do? Well, I'll chime in first. First thing I think we need to do is find ways to reduce our exposures to the traditional financial system, to the banks. Get your money out of the bank, at least to some degree. For a lot of reasons, the potential bail-in laws. You could wake up one day and they could confiscate your money, or just lock their doors. So just get your money out of the bank, and then once you do that, you got to put it into something that's going to either match inflation, maybe silver or gold. It's not sexy, but it's actual currency, and it's a little bit of protection. And then you got to find some growth somewhere. You got to find something that's actually going to offset inflation. Now, you and I are in a program where we get 3x all day long. So 3x, we actually do better than that because of an option that we have. But that certainly takes care of my inflationary issues. So whether it's a program that you and I are in or something else that gives you a nice, healthy growth rate in a reliable, steady fashion. I mean, you and I, from this one program and other things that we do, we have passive recurring income that we can rely on. We know it's going to be there. And I think people have to start developing forms of passive recurring income. They can't rely on their one paycheck to pull the load anymore. They've got to create, they've got to be creative. They've got to start listening to programs like this and start educating themselves. And of course, they need to start with blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and then programs like ours where they can generate some passive income. So
yeah, it's great advice, Ed. One thing, I don't think I could really add anything to that, but what I would say as an adjunct to that, in addition to it, while you're doing all of those things that you're talking about there, Ed, is you need to get yourself a little bit more of an education. And one thing, I've been reading a lot of books recently because I've kind of been a little bit sidelined for some health issues. So I'm just going to give you a couple of book titles, and we'll get some links as well down below. So already given you one for this one, When Money Dies, about inflation and stuff and the end of World War I. So there's another one called Red Handed, and that's written by a fellow named Peter Schweizer. And this is a book about all of the corruption that has been going on and how American politicians are in bed with Chinese politicians and what they're doing and how they're taking these underhanded deals. The other one, of course, is Miranda Devine's book, Laptop from Hell, about Hunter Biden and how the big guy is on the receiving end of all of the nefarious deals that this guy has done. Now, just a quick note on that book, whatever side of politics that you come from, the left or the right, I promise you that in some way, some strange way, you'll kind of like Hunter Biden because he's a villain. And Miranda Devine is a great writer. And the guy is just off the rails. And he's off the rails, running amok with drugs and strippers and prostitutes and money and all of these deals. And his life blows up. And there's all this sort of stuff going on. So it doesn't matter what side of politics you're from. It's actually a pretty good story. And when you look behind the curtain of people's lives, it's often very, very chaotic and very tragic as well at the same time. And then there's all of the other things that are associated with it, right, as in relation to politics and the Biden family name and all those sorts of stuff. And so it doesn't really matter what side of politics you're on and what you believe about any of that. I really recommend that book because it's a great story, and you couldn't write it in a movie script because it's real life. And some of the things that this guy gets up to are just absolutely unbelievable. And this thing is it's researched in such granular detail. She uses the laptop, of course, but she also uses other things to kind of to cover off the potential gaps that are in there in relation to the dates and the timings and all that sort of stuff. And the most recent book that I just finished just yesterday, in fact, was called Putin's Playbook. And it's written by a lady named Rebecca Koffler. And Rebecca Koffler she grew up in Kazakhstan in the Soviet Union in the late 80s, and she immigrated to the United States, and she worked in the corporate space for a long time. And then she became an intelligence officer for DIA. So she held the very highest security clearance that you could have in the US government. So she was kind of tasked with that responsibility, and her specialty as a Russian language expert is Russia. And she talks about how the Russians sow discourse into American society, and what they did in the election in 2016. They never intervened in the election in 2016, but they didn't get Donald Trump elected. They don't care who's in power. All they care about is muckraking and turning people inwards to each other. And she talks about the disinformation campaigns that they create, and just the chaos that they sow throughout the US, and because they see the US as the number one adversary. And she talks about space, cyber, kinetic, and all of the two other things that are in there that they use to create total division in American society. That is also applicable here in Australia as well, and some of the things that have gone on, because a lot of the Putin playbook that's going on there, the Putin playbook in Ukraine right now, that's half a page of like a 500-page book. So what you're seeing going on there in Ukraine right now is nothing compared to actually the other things that are happening. You know, he's the master spy, the master KGB agent. And interestingly, the Chinese take a leaf out of his book, and a lot of the stuff that Putin does in America, the Chinese do here in Australia, because we're seen as a pretty big threat to the Chinese, and they're trying to get in here and sow discourse and cause all sorts of trouble. But the problem is, here in Australia, most Aussies are different to Americans. They're just like, oh, whatever, man, I just don't care. So there's not the same level of outrage. People are, oh, what is that what they're doing? Oh, who cares, man? Like, it just couldn't be stuff even thinking about it. That laid back, she'll be right attitude is not necessarily the right way to be looking at those things. But there's a couple of really good book titles there that kind of dovetail into what you're talking about, Ed, where you've got to create those other forms of income. You've got to insulate yourself from the outside world and what's going on in the economy. But you won't have a reason to do all of that if your life is feeling pretty good. If you're doing okay, if your job's okay at the moment, you got a pocket full of money, your family's good, your health is good, everything's all right. There's no real motivation for you to do anything. Sure, I've always got one eye on investments, and I'm looking after my money, and I'm doing all those sorts of things. But until you start educating yourself on some of the really bad and nefarious things that are going on in our societies, in our cultures right now, you're not going to have the same level of motivation to actually do something about it. And I fear that the Hunter Biden laptop stuff has now been come out into mainstream media, and the ramification of that, I don't think it's going to be covered up. I think that's going to affect your society there in the States the same way as this fake Russian campaign affected your society there with Trump when he was in power a couple of years ago. This is going to affect what's happening to government, whether you like Biden or you don't. The chaos and discourse that it creates within society takes your eye off other things that are going to cause problems. Like, isn't there 1 million people that have gone over the southern border right now, but you're sending billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine, but you're not securing the border? And like, the hypocrisy of it is like gobsmacking, and the incompetence of it is just unbelievable. But it's all by design. Yes. They're not doing this because they're incompetent or it's corrupt. They're doing it for a reason.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
The southern border. There's an agenda involved there. They're
you
perfectly
must
happy.
educate yourself on these things. Hey, you have to.
Yeah. There you go. You know, and let's not forget that we just came off of 2 years of this COVID that threw the world just upside down, and it created a lot of that. Look, I've been watching what's going on in Australia. Australia has been really in the spotlight with all of the the riots and the protests, although they're not really covered that much in the mainstream. But you got to look a little bit. But there is a lot of discontent going on, not just in Australia but around the world. Many countries in Europe over those issues. So the point being, yeah, discord. Yeah, but what a good word for it. Discord. Yeah, in a very big way in our societies around the world. And I think a lot of people are jaded, and a lot of younger people are wondering, what's my future like when real estate prices are this high? I mean, how does a young couple starting out try to buy a house in this kind of a market? And when are they going to be able to? Now, I think the housing market is going to have a big comeuppance pretty soon. I think by the end of the summer, we're going to see things turn in a pretty dramatic way because interest rates are starting to go up. Refis are down 50% year over year, and they're down 8% week over week. So people have stopped refinancing their mortgages. Why? Well, the interest rates are going up now. And you know that those people, well, you got to wonder, why is anybody refinancing? I mean, they've had a lot of years to do the refinancing if they were going to do it. So why is anybody refinancing now when rates are going up? So then you have to wonder, well, maybe they're refinancing because they need the money. They got some equity in that house. That's not a good sign if people are taking, this is echoes of 2008, 2009, right? When people were pulling equity out of their house to buy another house, to buy another house, to buy another house.
I want to step back from that a little bit to maybe just give people to try and put a rocket under their chair a little bit to help them to understand the seriousness of the situation that we're in. But for some reason, we all suffer from that optimism bias. Like right now, everything's okay. And everything, it's chaos. There's always been chaos. It's always like, just turn it off and everything's all right. But the reality is all of this will affect you. And, I just want to step all the way back out of that financial thing for a sec and just talk about the situation in Ukraine. And here we are on the 1st of April here in Sydney, where yesterday or the day before yesterday, Putin said he was going to pull back from that. And if you know anything about the way the Ruskies behave themselves on the battlefield, he's not pulling back from anything. He's pulling back and reloading. Yeah. And he'll lull you into a false sense of security and cause all sorts of problems to come. If I just fast forward the scenario and say the worst possible case happens and he lobs in. So part of the reason that everybody is so gentle about what they say about Putin and what's going on in the Ukraine is because every war game that's ever happened with NATO in the history that NATO has existed, NATO always overwhelms the Russians with force because there's 30 countries versus one country and there's just more force. And every single time at the end of those war games and those exercises, what do you think he does? He lobs a nuke. Yeah. He lobs a nuke usually into Poland, usually somewhere in like Warsaw. So if he's lobbing a nuke over there like that, and then there's another response, Putin's playbook is to de-escalate, he will escalate because he knows that we don't want to use those weapons to escalate. So just work with me on the hypothetical here for a second. In the worst possible scenario that happens, that he lobs a tactical nuke, an artillery round at somebody in Warsaw, in Poland, or maybe at Kiev or somewhere on the battlefield in the Ukraine, lobs one, and the Americans then lob one, or the French or the British do. And then he lobs another and another and another. Life as we know it will completely end. And it's not because of nuclear war. Yeah. There's going to be an exchange. And when those weapons go off, there's catastrophic damage and radiation and all of the stuff that we know about that's happening there. But imagine if we end up in a kinetic conflict with China and 5 or 6 nukes were lobbed in at 5 or 6 big sites in China. Think of the supply chain problems we've got right now with China. because of COVID. Now, imagine if you go and destroy all of the factories. If you see the pictures coming out of Ukraine and the absolute devastation and destruction that's there, I saw some footage, some drone footage of these Russian troops going up to a railway bridge and blowing up the railway bridge. And I thought to myself, it took like half a dozen conscripts, all of about 15 minutes to do that. But that's going to take literally 9 to 12 months to repair. Because in order to fix that, you've got to fix this. And then to get that to happen, you've got to do like just the sheer logistics of getting that solved. And that's just like one railway line that was cut in half. You can't go that way. You can't go that way anymore. Just an absolute disaster. And if you zoom out on that scale to the entire country of the Ukraine, it's been absolutely devastated. In some parts, 90% of the buildings have been actually completely rubbled to the ground. So how are they going to build that back better? Well, in order for the Great Reset to happen, we need to destroy everything first. And if there's a nuclear exchange that goes on, the logistics and the supply chains and all of that stuff will completely stop life as we know it. Remember just a couple of months ago, that ship in the Suez Canal that got wedged in the canal? Yeah, it was going along, it was tracking in the right distance, and then it ran aground and it was wedged sideways. It's like, how the hell does that happen? And then at one end of the Suez Canal, there's like 50 ships. And at the other end, there's like 150 ships. And just the chaos that one little shipping traffic jam caused, that was the beginning of all the supply chain problems that you guys have been facing in the States. And no one ever ties it back to that, but that's actually where it all started, because that went on for like 3 or 4 weeks until they fixed the problem. And then all the backlog of all of that happened. And it happened here in Australia. There was a whole bunch of ships that went outbound to China, and the Chinese went, you know what, we don't want your stuff anymore, piss off. And the ships are just sitting off the coast of China going, okay, where are we going to send the coal? Or where are we going to send those lobsters? Or what are we going to do with that stuff? And it just causes chaos. And if there's a kinetic conflict and the scale of a nuclear war, it's not the nuclear war that's going to stop life as you know it. It's the logistics that go away. You know, and when you think about it, use a battlefield analogy that amateurs talk about tactics and professionals talk about logistics. So when you look at what's going on in the world and the chaos that this is going to create and the follow-on effects and the snowball effects that this creates, you've got to bring it back to you and say, well, if the worst case scenario happens, or even if half the worst case scenario happens that I'm talking about here, what does that mean for me as an individual? I can't rely on the government. They're too slow to react. I can't rely on money from the government. I can't rely on social security. I've got to rely on myself. And if inflation runs away like it does at the end of World War I in Germany, and your money suddenly becomes worthless, how are you actually going to produce food for your family? Have you got water? There's no government rule or regulation out there that says you need to have at least 60 liters worth of water. You need 3 jerry cans worth of tap water sitting in your garage at all times. You need to have at least 30 days worth of food sitting in your garage at all times. You need to have, 20 boxes of toilet paper there, or hand towel, or whatever. You need to have, there's nothing in government that says that you need to prepare. And there's nothing wrong with preparing. You must prepare. You must prepare physically. You must prepare for food. You must prepare emotionally, spiritually, financially. You have to have all of these things happening. And then most important, you've got to have people around you that care about you, that you can rely on, that you can ask for help, that can fix things for you. And you need to be able to be of service to them for those reasons as well, because you're not going to survive by yourself. And if the worst comes to pass, you're going to need a village of people that are around you to help you to make all of these things happen. It's scary stuff. We live at a tipping point in history where the nuclear clock is 90 seconds to midnight when you go and Google it, or whatever it is at the moment. But if you listen to all of the people talking about nuclear war and all of the stuff that's been going on, we've never been closer. This is closer than the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if you go and read Rebecca Koffler's book, Putin's Playbook, you'll see that we are literally just moments away from this happening. Because to de-escalate the situation, when you back the guy into a corner, what is he going to do? He's going to escalate. He's going to escalate, and the way he's going to escalate is with a nuke. And their ability, their first strike capability, is far better than what you guys have there in the States. But the ace in the hole that happens there in Europe is all the submarines prowling around the coastline, all the French submarines and the British submarines, as well as part of that nuclear triad. So I think he knows that as well. And I think he'll suffer the consequence if something bad like that happens. But we are literally 5 seconds to midnight from a nuclear apocalypse. And it's not going to be an apocalypse from nuclear war. They're not going to target our cities like they did in World War II, to target military installations and do all sorts of stuff like that. The apocalypse comes after. And you've got to ask yourself if you want to be a survivor of that if you're not prepared. So scary times in history. And I'm trying to say all of these things to prompt you into action, to make you do something about this, do something about your money, do something about your survivability. And you have to become one of those maybe extreme preppers. There's nothing wrong with being a prepper, and there's nothing wrong with being prepared and ready for these things.
So I got to ask, how many acres do you have set aside in the outback there for you?
I don't need the acreage. When the nuke goes off here, I'm just going to go and move into the neighbor's place. I'm just going to take whatever I want.
Love it. It must give you some peace of mind knowing that you can always get your.
I'm just going to bury the bodies in the backyard and then just move in. Whatever, man. I'll take their cows and their veggie patch. It'll be fine. It'll be all right.
Yeah, so there you go. I mean, people have to take responsibility. They've got to, at some point it becomes a you problem. You have to, I mean, a lot of everything that Rob and I have been talking about should not be news really to people, except for the nuclear scenario we just went over. That'll wake some people up. That'll be it.
Well, you don't spend the time thinking about it, right? Like, when was the last time you ever thought about a nuclear war? Like, never. Yeah. Never. I was in the military for a long time, right? And when I was in the Navy back in the day, I was on a guided missile frigate, and these Oliver Hazard Perry class frigates came from the US. They were built in Australia, but they're American ships. And I remember talking to some American guys that were on those ships. And I joined the Navy in 1994. And I remember coming across this guy. He'd been in the Navy since 1984. He'd been in like 10 years when I'd met him. And I remember him telling me that part of what they used to do during the Cold War was the planning exercise, how they'd go across from Alaska to Russia, and how they would take the carrier battle groups over there in the Pacific Ocean, and how they'd attack that part of Russia, and what they would do, and how all these things would happen. And when you look back through some of the documents that used to be in the safe there, all the secret documents and the confidential documents, a whole bunch of it is related to nuclear war. And you're like reading these things as a young man, just thinking, oh my God, like, what is this? Like, I grew up in the Cold War, but I was just a kid, right? I never really understood any of that stuff or knew anything about that. And that was sort of my entree into it. And, I spent a percentage of my time reading those documents because it was interesting to me to think that mutually assured destruction was the thing that stopped it from actually happening. But actually, that's the incorrect doctrine. And we now know that because we now know how the Ruskies think about it. Is once upon a time, here in the West, we think that, well, we've got a finger on the trigger, but if we do, you do too, and nobody wins, so we're not going to do it. That's the concept of mutually assured destruction. It's mad, so we're not going to do it. But actually, no. When you read Russian doctrine and when you see Russian military doctrine, they believe vehemently that they can win a nuclear war. We never thought that we could win a nuclear war, because what's the point of that? Why would we do that? Everybody's going to know. We're not going to go targeting their cities. Are you kidding? Really? We're going to kill innocent civilians like that? We'll destroy the military installation, sure, but we're going to blow up the cities as well at the same time? No, we're not going to do that, because they're going to do that to us. But actually, no. And if you look at the doctrine of recent times from 2010, here in the West, we have, or here in Australia at least, we have a thing called a white paper. So government releases white paper about defense things, about different projects and different things. And back in 2010, this is all in Rebecca Koffler's book, Putin reassessed all of the nuclear capability that they had and modernized it all. And because it's, 40, 50, 60 years old in some cases. So he went and updated it all and modernized it all, pulled them out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, the short range, medium range treaty. So now went and built all of these weapons that none of us in Western society had a counter to. And when you look at their doctrine is we can win this nuclear war. We will use nuclear weapons. They're a natural extension of the battlefield, and we can win, and we will win with them. So everything that people have estimated about Putin and his army in the last couple of months has been found to be wrong, because his army is just a bunch of conscripts. Their equipment is terrible, and their training is awful because they're centralized. Yeah, centralized government training. How many generals have been killed on the battlefield? 8 or 9, according to public reports. Maybe less, maybe more. Who really knows? Point is, they're saying that these people are being killed on the battlefield. And if you look at the footage of how columns of vehicles are coming along, one vehicle gets hit and they all scatter to the four winds like that. I promise you that in Western armor doctrine, if one vehicle gets hit, everybody keeps advancing. Somebody else will fill in that gap and we keep moving forward. And the reason for that is because the people that are in charge are the warrant officers, the sergeants and the staff sergeants and the corporals, and then the lance corporals, and then the diggers and the privates. They can all do the same job as everybody else because we have a decentralized command structure that enables us to actually fight and to win. The Russians don't have that. But what they do have is a doctrine that says that they can win a nuclear war. And in order to de-escalate the situation, we will escalate it. We are like 3 seconds to midnight on that clock. It is scary, scary stuff. And if you think that what they've got in a nuclear triad is the same as what we've got, so ICBMs, aircraft, and submarines, you're wrong. It's complete that they have that, but it's not the same doctrine, and they definitely don't use it the same way as we do. So you gotta do something about it, folks. You got to get yourself some income that's not reliant on a job. You got to create some income outside of your job to protect yourself from these things. And you need additional income to cover the cost of inflation and things that are going on in the world.
Yeah. The 3 points that we kind of outlined are really not that complicated. Reducing your exposure to the bank, go to the bank, get some cash out, at least some, get some silver and gold. Okay. That helps. But then you really got to find some way of compensating for inflation. What if we do get to $20 a loaf bread? By the end at some point,
have some flour, buy some flour, have some yeast, have all of those things on hand because you can make that stuff really easily. You don't need any special equipment, and instead of paying $20 for a loaf of bread, it'll cost you 20 cents. Because you've taken the time to buy the flour, to store it correctly, and you've got that stuff available to you as well. So, just little things like that make an unbelievable difference. And you don't need silos of flour to make bread for an entire village. You just need enough to look after your family for a couple of months until it all kind of settles down, because things have a way of working themselves out. And all the doom and gloom that we're talking about here is not going to go on forever. I look at it and I think of it like the slingshot analogy. How bad can it get? You keep pulling it can get worse, it can get worse, it can get worse. Eventually that lets go and it goes, and you go the other direction and it improves by a magnitude of 2 or 3 times in the other direction. So,
there you go. Because we don't want to be negative all the time. The fact that, but if you're prepared, there are going to be times for you're going to be able to prosper from what's going to happen if you take a little bit of time to look beyond the hill, look forward a little bit and see what we are seeing and come up with a plan so that if this and this happens, look, coming out of the Great Depression, fortunes were made by people who did a lot of bargain hunting because they had some dough to do the bargain hunting when they could buy those houses at 10 cents on the dollar. When no one else wanted it. So fortunes are going to be made after this event too. So we want everyone to be rich. You and I, that's our message, right? And give people some knowledge and a skill set so that they can be filthy rich. They can be in the top 1% through all this. You got to
figure out. I think in the inflation thing there, Ed, to that point, you got to figure out what's going to be valuable to people. So if suddenly a loaf of bread that was normally $2 is now $20, you've had like a 10x inflation there. If you've got some gold and silver, well, the price of gold and silver 10x, maybe it might like 200x. Who knows what's going to happen with that? The point is, if you owe $400,000 on your mortgage, or you owe $4 million on your mortgage, what can you exchange now and have now on hand that is of extreme value when those times arrive? And you've got a surplus of those things. So then you can go away and say, hey, I'll offload this for $1 million. And because money has just been printed into oblivion, people have got $1 million. They go, there you go. And then you go, how much do I owe on my mortgage? $1 million. There you go. And I just paid my mortgage off for $2,000 worth of gold bars. That's how people prosper in inflation, in inflationary times. And just go and Google how to prosper in inflationary times. You'll find out what becomes a valuable commodity and what you can exchange for that cash, which is actually worthless, but the bank has to take it. People in Germany the finance people in Germany are like, there's no way in the world we're buying gas off the Russians. We're not swapping euros for rubles to buy their gas. No, because you're just pumping up the war machine. That's the first thing. And the second thing, it just doesn't make any sense to actually do that. But if you've got something of value that you can exchange in times where money has been printed into oblivion and it's lost its value, you'll still only owe 400 grand on your mortgage. Just because money is less valuable doesn't mean you don't owe more money. You still owe 400 grand. That's what the number is. Well, how can I get 400 grand? Well, you need to exchange something of value to get that, to be able to pay that off. So you can prosper really well in that sense if you're clever about it as well. And that just requires some planning and some thinking as well.
And so, Rob and I are here to help you guys if you have any questions. Rob, I'm going to have your contact information below, but for the fun of it, you want to give people your contact information in case anyone wants to call and give you a chin wag. Did they say that down in Australia, or is that a British thing?
No, you could say that. That's Aussie and British as well. Yeah, I'd be happy to connect with you. You can reach out to me via Instagram, just rob.bruss77, or you can connect with me at thecryptocartel.io. So you can find me at both those places. I'm pretty active there, and I'd love to connect with you and have a conversation or exchange emails.
And of course, my contact information will be in the description below. You can just send me an email. I'm more old school. I just do email. I don't do Instagram. Just send me an email, and I'll be happy to talk to you about the program that Ryan and I discussed. And of course, you can get a hold of Rob and talk to him too. And we're kind of gabbers. We both like to hear ourselves talk. So we're happy to get on the phone or Zoom and talk to anybody about this stuff. Okay, so Rob, I know it's already noon there your time
we're nudging 1:30 in the afternoon here, so lunchtime.
I tried to think of a good April Fool's prank to do on you, but by the time people see this, that's going to be dated, so I didn't bother. So thank you very much for your time. Always great to see you, my friend, and make sure you come back to the channel.
My pleasure, Ed. We'll see you next time, mate. Bye for now.
Okay, so Edward Anderson from the Hey Ed YouTube channel, along with Rob Bruss in Australia, signing out.
Copy that.